If you were anything like me as a teenager, you shared that reverence for Frankie on PC and 1080p. Back in the days where exclusives were so much more exclusive, a bunch of boys who only had PCs discovered The Last of Us through him. And so every day we sat and we waited and we wanted to find out exactly what happened to these two characters that came in and stole our hearts. Joel and Ellie. Now don't get me wrong, I'd been playing video games my whole life.
I've got no...
Yeah, I'd like to see you try to do it as well as I did, bitch.
Heads up, sailors.
Oh shit. Oh shit. I'm drowning under it.
It's alright. Stay in. Another deep breath, Matt.
We did good, boys.
Oh, nice. I honestly cannot remember a time where a controller, a mouse, or a Game Boy wasn't in my hands. But the reason I started this series with The Last of Us isn't because I think it's the best example of not just being a game. We all know holds that. No, it's because The Last of Us was hardytrash's first exposure to a game being not just a game.
The number of confirmed deaths has passed 200. The governor has called a state of emergency.
Panic spread worldwide after a leaked report from the World Health Organization showed that the latest vaccination tests have failed. With the bureaucrats out of power, we can finally take the necessary steps.
Los Angeles is now the latest city to be placed under martial law. All residents are required to report to their designated quarantine. Riots have continued for a third consecutive day.
Nowadays, almost everyone knows that Naughty Dog is up there with the big dogs, pardon the pun, for those classic AAA games. You know, video games at their most video gamey. After the success of Crash Bandicoot on the original PlayStation in the late 1990s, Sony purchased Naughty Dog in 2001 and made them a first-party studio. It was in 2007 when Naughty Dog began work on the Uncharted series that The Last of Us as a concept spiritually began to grow. The Uncharted games marked the company's first foray into realistic worlds and characters, a stark contrast to the reputation that Mr. Bandicoot had given the studio. Naughty Dog was growing up. Darker, more grounded stories is what the studio was hungry for. In 2009, following the release of Uncharted's sequel, Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, development officially began on The Last of Us. Naughty Dog at this point had grown large enough to split development for the first time in company's history, with one team working on the third installment of the Uncharted series, Drake's Deception, and the other on The Last of Us. As I said before, this video was never going to be a full deconstruction of The Last of Us as a franchise. One thing I feel like I want to make abundantly clear though is that The Last of Us was never one man's vision. For all the mythos that surrounds the co-director Neil Druckmann, the story of The Last of Us was shaped by loads of different hands all throughout the years. Naughty Dog appointed Bruce Straley as the game director on the project, who acted as co-creator of the game alongside Neil Druckmann. Straley described the development of The Last of Us as a highly collaborative process, detailing that he and Neil were heavily involved in the essence of what they were trying to achieve with the game. A major motif during the development of The Last of Us was that life goes on. It's a theme that is definitely prevalent throughout the game, and even more so when you know about it and you've got it in the back of your mind while you're playing it. But the long and short of it is that, as I understand it, Straley insisted on hope and Druckmann kind of leaned more into the pain of things. Take from that what you will. Straley himself said that he believed that death in video games had become quite cheap, and I think that The Last of Us is a perfect example of how to do it right. I don't think there's one death in The Last of Us that doesn't feel like it's earned, at least of a main character. Every loss hurts, every single one of them feels like it has some weight to it, but none of them feel manipulative. And whilst I couldn't articulate it at the time of my first playthrough, it was this concept, this idea that back in 2013, when I first experienced this story, it caused this game to fundamentally rewire my concept of video games as I knew them. Now, to fully understand The Last of Us's cultural impact, we need to zoom out and have a look at the world that it was born into. In the early 2010s, the Western world was zombie bad. AMC's The Walking Dead had taken the world by storm, and forums lit up with all these theories about Rick and the gang, and it felt like every single game studio was rushing out their own apocalypse simulator, all trying to catch that lightning in a bottle that Daisy had cracked open. And this was the background noise of teenage life for young hardytrash and his friends. Some spent watching The Walking Dead, staying up late in our bedrooms, playing survival games, and trying desperately to capture even a tiny fraction of what Frankie was doing on Daisy. Whilst it may sound indulgent or perhaps even a little bit romantic, I found myself reflecting on these formative years with such a unique level of nostalgia, and I think it's one that's really relevant to the backdrop of The Last of Us and the impact it had on my history with gaming. Back then, that horror element that you might consider to be inherent to the genre honestly wasn't even a factor. My days of sleepless nights after watching 28 Days Later worrying about an impending apocalypse were far behind me. It was all about Chernarus, empty roads, no school. At its heart, it was freedom. A weird comfort in the idea that the world could end, but you'd still be with your mates, living out these stories that we love so much. And when these worlds finally collided, when the man himself uploaded a playthrough of a game that none of us had really heard of, something changed. Well, everything changed. The Last of Us launched to universal acclaim on the 14th of June, 2013.
What on earth do the Fireflies want with you?
If you were online at all that summer, you certainly wouldn't have missed the buzz. Tens everywhere. And it didn't take long for the emotional impact that the game had, not just on the critics but on the players as well, to start surfacing online. And the ironic thing here is that I've never really been one for Let's Plays. But I suppose it was a bit of a perfect storm. A YouTuber that I really, really loved happened to entice me with a game that I couldn't play, and one that I vaguely knew centered around an apocalypse. And just like that, I was in. I'm sure maybe that some of you have some alarm bells ringing over the fact that my first true experience of The Last of Us was through the eyes of a YouTuber. And even now, if someone were to tell me that they were going to watch someone play the game rather than play it themselves, I think I'd argue against it. But I've got to give credit to Frankie here if this video hasn't already blown too much smoke up his ass. His playthrough was perfect for a first-time viewer. I actually rewatched it while I was preparing for this video, and he kept quiet during the cutscenes, played the game with like a similar cinematic style to what you'd see back in the old E3 videos.
Almost makes you forget what was in the city.
It was really something that kept you immersed. His commentary was so on point. He was a really good first experience of The Last of Us. Now, I've spent the entirety of this video setting the stage for why exactly The Last of Us was not just a game. And now, it's showtime. If you clicked on this video, I don't doubt that you already know the plot of the game. I think at this point, after my multiple playthroughs, yes, at this point, I have played through the game. I think at this point, the story's plot is deeply ingrained in my mind's eye. I'm sure an argument can be made that the game's plot is a tale as old as time. A veteran, grizzled, and weathered protagonist reluctantly takes on some cargo that he is abhorrently against.
You don't bring up Tess. Ever. In fact, we just keep our histories to ourselves.
This forced companionship, this forced relationship eventually grows into some genuine, heartfelt connection. It goes from, let's just get through this, to, I cannot do this without you. It's a story that's been done before and a story that's been told again since, but I don't think that takes away from how well The Last of Us does it. And boy, it does it well.
my baby girl.
I think The Last of Us's intro easily stands as one of the strongest openings to a video game out there. As I said at the start of the video, for my friends and me watching this playthrough together, we really didn't have much of an idea of what the game was actually about.
Hello?
Sarah, honey, I need to get your daddy on the phone.
Uncle Tommy, what time is it?
I need to talk to your dad now. There's something.
Uncle Tommy?
Of course, considering the landscape of the early 2010s, I'm sure we were all hoping for some super immersive, more polished DayZ clone, but the reality is none of us had any idea for what we were actually in for.
What was that all about?
Immediately, the player is put into the shoes of Sarah, Joel's 12-year-old daughter. I remember thinking upon my first experience with the game, hold on, is this the girl from the trailers? Isn't she called Ellie? I didn't really connect all the dots, and I can tell you for a fact now I had no idea what direction this intro would go in.
Dad?
The atmosphere in this sequence, I think, is just second to none. Well, maybe one. The eeriness of waking up in the middle of the night, home alone, and it's all just kicked off. That was the boogeyman under my bed when I was a kid. So after walking around the house for some time where some other little atmospheric set pieces occur, Sarah's reunited with her dad, and the immediate relief over big, strong Joel coming back is undone when we hear his panicked voice telling Sarah to stay back.
Just stand back there.
Dad, you're kind of freaking me out. What's going on?
Honestly, for a group of silly boys who spent their days half naked, sweating in racing chairs, playing Dota or CSGO, the silence that I can remember in the call when we were all watching this stands as a testament to just how gripping this introduction was.
Jimmy, I am warning you.
No.
Now, we all know how the introduction ends.
Please don't. Please.
And then... Wait, what? 20 years later? What? I couldn't believe that time jump. I didn't even have time to process what just happened. The intro, the subsequent acts, characters, arcs, moments, all of it. This was the first time in my life, after playing games for my whole life, that a game affected me in a way that no other pieces of media had at the time. And listen, I had obviously been emotional over films and books, music, all of it before. And The Last of Us was not a patient zero in that regard. But what it did do was open the door for video games to transcend that place that my brain put them in before. Time killers, high scores, competitions, whatever. Immediately, watching the next part of the game, the action-packed, more fast-paced and intense sections, I was invested in Joel as a character. So I thought rather than breaking down every single one of the game's scenes and plot points, I'd pick a few key moments and arcs that I can vividly remember sticking with me after those credits rolled for the first time in 2013. It's hard to recall exactly how I was feeling right in those moments, but if I'm honest with you guys, by and large, the way I felt back then is probably much the same as I feel today after many playthroughs. When I started thinking about what parts of the game that I wanted to touch on in these sections, the first thing that came to my mind was this little side adventure with Henry and his younger brother Sam. I don't exactly know if I'm able to articulate this perfectly, but this section of the game for me feels like a brief holiday from all of the chaos. It feels a bit more removed from the gritty and dark reality that the game so often hits you with, and something about just being washed up on the shore after the action-filled sequence directly before it just feels like an adventure within an adventure. For me, and for the briefest of moments, it really feels like this is the game's good times.
It's Tommy's birthday.
The tiniest glimpse of Ellie being allowed to be a kid, Joel letting his guard down, and there being the slightest sense of hope.
I could die happy if I could just ride one around the block. What was it like?
It was good. It was real good.
Good? Can you believe this guy? Come on.
Ironically enough, it isn't the Joel and Ellie of it all that stands out as the main reason for this section being one of my favorites in The Last of Us, but the story that the player slowly uncovers when they make their way through the small sewer settlement. Ish, the fisherman. Now, I've originally got in my script here that I can't tell you if Frankie took the time to read all of the notes left behind, but upon re-watching it all, he did. But the first time that I remember really experiencing it was when I finally got to play the game myself. So I already knew what I was in for, obviously, so I decided to take my time making my way through the game, and naturally that meant I became a collectible hunter. And for those unaware, Ish was a fisherman who basically washed up into the sewers and created a little settlement there that unfortunately got overrun, and you can find out all about how the settlement was set up and its glory days and how it eventually fell. Ish finally ended up escaping from the settlement, and that's the last you really hear of him. Maybe one day we'll get a standalone game on that, huh? It's this little story within a story, this little arc where we just get to exist as Joel, protecting Ellie, making their way with other survivors through the overgrown post-apocalyptic world that lays the foundation for us all connecting with these characters. Without these moments, all of it holds less weight. When it falls apart, when things fundamentally change down the line, we would have nothing to think back on with that golden lens of nostalgia if it wasn't for these moments. So that's why Henry, Sam, and Ish's strange little town was so instrumental in giving the events that followed so much more weight.
So where's this tower?
We're close. Come on, let's go.
Another thing that I think this section of the game so aptly does is reaffirm the unspoken father-daughter dynamic that Joel and Ellie share. With Henry being the older brother of Sam and essentially acting as a father, that familial bond is unspokenly transferred over to Joel and Ellie's relationship, whether they like it or not. Joel definitely recognizes how protective Henry is over Sam, and I think it bleeds into his dynamic with Ellie. Probably the first real part of the game where he leans into that role. To some, it may seem like a section that falls by the wayside when it comes to the crucial Joel and Ellie moments, but I loved this section of the game then, and I still love it now. Next up, and I'm sure a lot of you guys saw this coming, was, of course, the winter sequence. I think the main thing that stands out for me here, something that I remember feeling even back during my first experience of the game, was just how painful seeing Joel out of action was for me. Spending all of this time connecting with him and being in his shoes, getting more adept at surviving with the infected, working with Ellie, having him shivering, cooped up in a garage over winter was just terrifying. You've got to remember, it's 2013. None of us knew if he made it to the end of that story. In fact, I think at this point, most of us boys had seen 2009's The Road and had already started drawing some parallels. Who knew if they'd share the same ending? Now, we're going to get a bit artsy in this next section because underscoring this fear and this anxiety and this change of dynamic was the pretty drastic change in environment. The color palette moves quite drastically into a new territory that the player hasn't quite experienced yet. And by this point, we've experienced the lush, overgrown cities. We've experienced the warm sunsets of Bill's little town. The cold and desolate landscape of this sequence really helps to unsettle the player as they take control of Ellie. I remember balancing the excitement that I felt over Ellie getting the chance to demonstrate some badassery with the anxiety of whether or not Joel would make it. Couple that with having to wait each day for a new episode. Tough stuff. One thing I want to highlight before I move further into this section, similarly to how I highlighted at the start of the video that the world was zombie mad.
The defeat was merely a delay.
The gaming landscape, as I recall it, was at a really, really interesting crossroads where a lot of devs were leaning into player freedom.
When the sons of Skyrim would spill the whole...
After the success of Skyrim in 2011 and the wealth of videos demonstrating how the sandbox element of the RPG could be used to be anyone and do anything, a lot of developers started chasing that mythical dragon of players using their games to make their own stories, own characters, and own narratives.
Fire.
Again, probably a video for another time, and again, as I mentioned near the beginning of the video, my friends and I thought in these early days that The Last of Us was just another trend chaser, offering that post-apocalyptic, open-world RPG experience. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because it feeds into just why this section hit as hard as it did when I first experienced it. Losing that father-daughter dynamic duo element that you've got so accustomed to, the monochrome of the entire sequence, and ultimately that feeling of futility, of having little to no control over how the events are playing out, it really does an excellent job of adding to that anxiety. It wasn't something you were entirely used to. Sure, there was a story in Skyrim, but you could choose to ignore it and do a million other things. Sure, sometimes in DayZ the story you're forging can be dark and depressing, but one fact remained. You were in control of it. The Last of Us, you couldn't really exist in that comfort if you wanted to move the story forward. Which brings me neatly along to the most infamous character of the game, David. Frustratingly, whilst I can remember certain things about my first experience with the game, I can't quite remember how long it took for me to clock David's intentions, let's say. I do think that I was immediately on edge with Ellie being caught out in the way that she is without Joel. But I also think that the hopeful little fella inside of me wanted to trust David, wanted to believe that there wasn't an ulterior motive and that he genuinely wanted to help Ellie. Either way, what plays out here when she's kidnapped just further highlights the powerlessness of the story's direction here. Whilst the game had demonstrated its ability to explore deeper themes by this point, I think this brief section really acts as a bit of a microcosm for how this game was probably one of my first forays into that not just a game territory. Taking control of Joel and his rampage, amped up with adrenaline to rescue Ellie, was extremely satisfying, but that heart-wrenching moment where poor Ellie falls into his arms and for the first time we hear Joel refer to her as baby girl. That music taking over as we lose the ability to hear what's being said between them.
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
It's okay.
Masterful. I've seen arguments made online that Joel's attachment to Ellie, which I think was really cemented truly in this moment, is unhealthy or wrong. Filling the void that Sarah left, it's hard stuff to read if I'm honest. As I said, I loved Joel. He could do no wrong, and in many ways I had no qualms with Ellie filling that void for him. In fact, I wanted the two of them to be happy, settled, and surviving out there together until the end. But then suddenly, after a brief respite of an adventure like the good old days, we're here. The crescendo of the game's story, that iconic hospital sequence. I don't think I've been very subtle about the pedestal that I put Joel on in this video so far, but to preface, Joel at this point in the story for young hardytrash was pretty much infallible. At no point during this sequence did I think that what he was doing was wrong. I wasn't thinking about the intricacies of the morality of his actions. I wasn't thinking about the bigger picture, the cure. I know there are much more nuanced views on this last act that deconstruct the unraveling of Joel's mental state, the mistakes he made, and that muddy grey area that his character falls into. But for me, as a young boy who idolized the man, who looked at this character as a role model, he could do no wrong. He was the hero of the story, and he was saving his daughter from the bad guys. So, still probably sitting in his sweltering room in the Somerset heat of 2013, hardytrash was certainly on the edge of his seat, just praying that Joel was going to get his gun and get out safe. I didn't care one bit about the cure. I didn't care about the fireflies. I just wanted the two of them to be safe happy, and free. That feeling of powerlessness as Joel made his way through that ward, not knowing what direction this story was going to go in, it was nail-biting stuff. I don't think back then I clocked the parallel between the prologue of the game and the ending, but what a beautiful piece of storytelling that is. Even today, those flashlights chasing Joel through that ward gets my heart pumping a bit faster, and then our hero saves Ellie, and on paper it should be a happy ending, right? Well, of course not. And it wouldn't be in keeping with the tone of the game to give us that way out. No way. There's a lot I don't remember about my first experience with the game. That ending was certainly not one of them. Staring at my screen speechless as those credits rolled, I don't think I'd ever had that before. It was my first time with that empty, lost feeling after you finish a really seriously good piece of media. I suppose you always remember your first, and it of course was not my last. The one thing I remember so vividly though was just immediately deciding it was my headcanon that Ellie believed Joel's lie. Again, I didn't fault him for it. I didn't think any of my friends and I did when we finally regained the ability to speak. So I'm going to close with this. If you're like me and you've been in a position before where someone's acted perplexed or even outright laughed in your face over the prospect of you getting emotional over a video game, take pity on them. Pity them for the fact that they've not had the privilege of experiencing these stories in the way that you and I get to experience them. It's not the same as a film or a book. These pieces of art have their own beautiful ways of touching us, but nothing, and I do mean nothing, comes close to not being able to let go of that controller or mouse or joystick, whatever the hell it is you're using, as those credits fill your screen. I know deep down I'll never stop being that goofy, light-hearted, smiley boy that watched Frankie play through this game, but I'll always aspire to be just as badass as Joel goddamn Miller.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man.
I'm not sure if it's because I didn't really have a father growing up, or if in general I'm just attracted to those strong middle-aged protagonists, but Joel, man, Joel was the start of it all. I don't want this video to become a dissection of masculinity, but for me, growing up, I think I found so many aspects of the man I wanted to grow into, the man I wanted to become through these characters and these stories. And as nerdy as it sounds, it's true. It was his stoicism, his strength that I wanted to find in myself.
Back when I was feeling broken, I focused on a prayer.
As the plot developed, I fell in love with Joel and Ellie, and as their relationship blossoms into this complicated faux father-daughter relationship that it is, this connection to the game, the characters, everything deepened.
All the missing crooked hearts, they may die, but in us they live on. And I believe, and I believe, 'cause I can see our future days of you.
It was simply, for me,
days of you and me.
Not just a game.
You and me. you and me.
I vividly remember not long after Frankie finished the game, I was standing in the kitchen waiting for dinner doing something completely goofy, and my brain kicked in and said, Joe wouldn't do that. And I can tell you now, my teenage outburst was immediately replaced with this stoic demeanor that probably lasted about 15 minutes. But that's the kind of effect that this game had on me.